The world is watching nervously as three West African nations quietly position themselves to potentially dictate the price of one of the most critical minerals on Earth. While Western media focuses on sensationalized narratives about military coups and instability, a far more profound transformation is unfolding across the Sahel, one that could fundamentally reshape global energy markets and finally give Africa the economic leverage it has been systematically denied for centuries. Today, we're examining how the Alliance of Sahel States, comprising Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, stands poised to become Africa's answer to OPEC, wielding uranium as their weapon of choice in the battle for genuine sovereignty. This isn't just another story about African politics. This is about the emergence of a new paradigm where African nations are no longer content to be mere extraction zones for foreign powers, but are instead asserting their rightful role as strategic players on the global stage. To comprehend the magnitude of what's happening in the Sahel, we must first understand uranium's critical importance in the global energy equation. As the world grapples with climate change and seeks alternatives to fossil fuels, nuclear energy has emerged as an indispensable component of the clean energy transition. Uranium, the fuel that powers nuclear reactors, is not just another commodity. It's the foundation upon which many nations' energy security rests. Niger alone supplies approximately 20% of the European Union's uranium needs, with France historically extracting over 100,000 tons of uranium from Nigerian soil since the 1970s. This isn't merely trade, it's been systematic resource extraction that has enriched foreign corporations while leaving local populations impoverished. The French nuclear giant Orano, formerly Areva, has operated in Niger for decades under agreements that were negotiated during colonial times and have remained largely unchanged despite Niger's supposed independence. But here's where the narrative becomes fascinating. The emergence of visionary leadership across the Sahel has fundamentally altered this dynamic. Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta in Mali, and General Abdourahmane Chiani in Niger represent a new generation of African leaders who understand that true sovereignty cannot exist without economic sovereignty. These leaders have recognized that Africa's mineral wealth should serve African development first, not foreign shareholders in Paris, London, or New York. What makes the current moment so extraordinary is the emergence of leaders who combine strategic acumen with genuine commitment to African liberation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, at just 36 years old, represents the crystallization of Pan-African aspirations that have been brewing for generations. His approach to governance transcends the traditional post-colonial model, focusing instead on resource sovereignty, regional integration, and youth empowerment. Traoré's vision for Burkina Faso extends far beyond national boundaries. He understands that small, landlocked Sahel nations cannot achieve meaningful sovereignty in isolation. They must unite their resources and coordinate their strategies. This understanding has driven the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, a confederation that pools not just military capabilities, but also economic leverage. The genius of this alliance lies in its recognition of collective bargaining power. Individually, each nation might be vulnerable to Western economic pressure. United, they control resources that are absolutely essential to the global economy. This isn't merely about uranium. The Sahel region contains significant deposits of gold, lithium, rare earth elements, and other critical minerals. However, uranium represents the most immediately powerful lever because of its strategic importance to energy security in developed nations. For decades, African uranium has followed a predictable pattern, extracted by foreign companies, processed in foreign facilities, and sold back to Africa at inflated prices as nuclear technology or electricity. This represents the very essence of colonial economics. Raw material flows out, value-added products flow back in, and the wealth accumulates in the metropole, while the periphery remains impoverished. The Alliance of Sahel States is systematically dismantling this model. Rather than simply allowing foreign companies to extract uranium under colonial-era agreements, these nations are demanding equity partnerships, local processing capabilities, and technology transfer. they're insisting that uranium mining must contribute directly to local development through infrastructure projects, education initiatives, and industrial capacity building. This approach reflects a sophisticated understanding of resource economics that previous generations of African leaders often lacked or were prevented from implementing by external pressure. The current leadership recognizes that controlling the extraction is only the first step. Controlling the value chain is what creates lasting prosperity. Consider the implications. If the Sahel Alliance successfully establishes uranium processing facilities and develops nuclear technology capabilities, they transform from price takers to price makers in the global market. They move from being passive suppliers of raw materials to active participants in the global energy ecosystem. One cannot understand the current transformation without acknowledging the demographic reality driving it. Africa is the world's youngest continent, with over 60% of its population under 25 years old. This generation has grown up with access to global information flows that their parents never had. They watch their continent's resources enrich foreign corporations while local communities remain underdeveloped, and they've drawn their own conclusions. Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself embodies this generational shift. Born in the 1980s, he represents a cohort of African leaders who never accepted the premise that Africa must remain subordinate to former colonial powers. These leaders have observed successful models of resource sovereignty in other regions, from Norway's management of its oil wealth to Botswana's diamond industry, and they've asked the fundamental question: why not Africa? The youth across the Sahel have become the backbone of these sovereignty movements. They understand that their future depends on breaking the cycle of resource extraction without local value addition. They've witnessed how previous generations were told to be patient, to accept gradual reform, to work within systems designed to perpetuate their subordination. This generation has concluded that patience is a luxury they cannot afford when climate change, population growth, and technological advancement are reshaping the global economy at unprecedented speed. The comparison between the Sahel Alliance and OPEC is not merely rhetorical, it's strategically astute. When OPEC was formed in 1960, oil-producing nations recognized that they were selling their most valuable resource far below its true market value because they lacked coordination and collective bargaining power. By organizing as a cartel, they transformed the global energy market and generated trillions of dollars in additional revenue for member nations. The uranium market today exhibits the same structural characteristics that made OPEC's intervention so effective. Production is concentrated among a relatively small number of suppliers, demand is relatively inelastic in the short term, and strategic stockpiling creates opportunities for supply management. The Sahel Alliance collectively controls enough uranium production to significantly impact global prices through coordinated supply decisions. But the alliance's potential influence extends beyond simple supply manipulation. They are positioned to leverage their uranium resources to attract investment in nuclear technology development, renewable energy infrastructure, and related industries. This represents a fundamental shift from the traditional African approach of competing with each other for foreign investment to collectively negotiating from a position of strength. The economic multiplier effects of this strategy could be transformational. Instead of uranium revenues flowing primarily to foreign shareholders, these resources could fund education systems, infrastructure development, and industrial diversification across the Sahel. The region could become a hub for nuclear technology in Africa, positioning itself as an essential partner for any nation seeking to develop civilian nuclear capabilities. The uranium strategy must be understood within the broader context of the Sahel's geopolitical realignment. These nations are not merely changing their resource policies, they're fundamentally reorienting their international relationships. The expulsion of French military forces, the reduction of Western development aid dependence, and the exploration of partnerships with Russia, China, and other non-Western powers all reflect a coherent strategy of diversifying relationships and reducing vulnerability to Western pressure. This diversification strategy draws inspiration from successful examples across the global South. Nations like Turkey, India, and Brazil have demonstrated that middle powers can pursue independent foreign policies while maintaining productive relationships with multiple great powers. The Sahel Alliance is applying these lessons to their specific context, using their resource wealth as leverage to secure better terms from all potential partners. The regional integration dimension is particularly significant. The three alliance members are cooperating on security, sharing intelligence, coordinating military operations against terrorist groups, and developing joint infrastructure projects. This cooperation creates the foundation for economic coordination that could eventually extend to uranium pricing, production quotas, and market strategy. Western media coverage of the Sahel transformation reveals the profound discomfort that established powers feel about African agency. Rather than analyzing the economic and strategic logic behind these nations' policies, coverage focuses obsessively on the military background of current leaders, often implying that civilian governance is inherently superior, regardless of its effectiveness or legitimacy. This narrative framework deliberately obscures the substantive policy debates occurring across the Sahel. Citizens in these nations are actively discussing resource sovereignty, economic development strategies, security arrangements, and international partnerships. They're making informed judgments about which leaders and policies best serve their interests. Yet Western media coverage often presents these populations as passive victims of military rule, rather than active participants in democratic processes. The uranium question perfectly illustrates this bias. When Western corporations controlled uranium extraction under colonial-era agreements, this was presented as normal economic activity. Now that African governments are asserting greater control over their resources, the same activities are portrayed as dangerous nationalism or economic mismanagement. This narrative distortion serves a clear purpose. It delegitimizes African decision-making and maintains the psychological foundation for continued Western intervention. By presenting African choices as inherently suspect, Western media creates justification for economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and even military intervention to restore stability. The Sahel Alliance's uranium strategy represents more than regional cooperation. It's a practical demonstration of Pan-African principles that have been theoretical for too long. The African Continental Free Trade Area, the African Union's Agenda 2063, and various regional economic communities have all promoted the concept of African economic integration. The Uranium Alliance shows how this integration can create concrete benefits for African peoples. Success in the Sahel could inspire similar resource coordination agreements across the continent. The Democratic Republic of Congo could leverage its cobalt and lithium resources more effectively. Nigeria could coordinate its oil and gas policies with other African producers. South Africa could use its mineral wealth to drive continental industrialization rather than primarily serving global markets. This model of resource sovereignty coordination aligns perfectly with the Pan-African vision articulated by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, who argued that African nations must unite economically to avoid neo-colonial exploitation. The current generation of Sahel leaders is implementing these ideas with a sophistication and strategic clarity that previous generations could only dream of achieving. The youth across Africa are watching these developments with intense interest. They understand that success in the Sahel creates a template for resource sovereignty that can be adapted throughout the continent. They see leaders who look like them, share their frustrations with neocolonialism, and are willing to take concrete actions rather than simply offering rhetoric about African unity. The potential success of the Sahel Uranium Alliance represents more than regional development. It signals the emergence of a new paradigm in global resource governance. For centuries, the global economy has been structured around core-periphery relationships, where raw materials flow from the global south to industrial centers in the global north, and value-added products flow back at much higher prices. This system has persisted not because it's economically inevitable, but because it's been enforced through a combination of military pressure, financial manipulation, and political interference. The Sahel Alliance's approach demonstrates that these arrangements are not immutable. They can be changed when nations have the courage to assert their sovereignty and the strategic wisdom to coordinate their efforts. The implications extend far beyond uranium markets. If African nations can successfully coordinate resource policies in one sector, they can do so in others. If they can break the cycle of raw material export and value-added import in uranium, they can do so for other critical minerals. If they can resist Western pressure to maintain colonial-era economic relationships, they can chart independent development paths across multiple sectors. China's rise demonstrated that non-Western nations could achieve rapid industrialization and economic growth. The potential success of the Sahel Alliance would demonstrate that African nations can assert economic sovereignty even when they start from positions of apparent weakness. This lesson would resonate throughout the global South and could accelerate the transition to a more multipolar global economy. The Sahel Alliance faces significant challenges in implementing their uranium strategy. Western powers possess numerous tools for applying pressure: economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, support for internal opposition groups, and even military intervention. The history of Western responses to African resource sovereignty attempts, from Iran's oil nationalization to Libya's independent foreign policy, suggests that resistance will be fierce. Technical challenges are equally significant. Developing uranium processing capabilities requires substantial investment, advanced technology, and specialized expertise. The Alliance will need to secure these resources from non-Western partners while building domestic capacity over time. This process will require sustained commitment across multiple electoral cycles and consistent policy implementation despite external pressure. Security concerns add another layer of complexity. The Sahel region faces ongoing threats from terrorist groups, criminal organizations, and potential external intervention. Maintaining stability while implementing ambitious economic reforms requires extraordinary leadership capabilities and popular support. However, these challenges are not insurmountable. The Alliance benefits from several factors that previous resource sovereignty movements lacked: a more multipolar global environment that provides alternative partnerships, advanced communication technologies that enable popular mobilization, and a generation of leaders who understand both the necessity and the methodology of collective action. Imagine the Sahel region in 2030 if the Uranium Alliance succeeds. Instead of watching their most valuable resources enriching foreign shareholders, local populations benefit directly from uranium revenues through improved education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic opportunities. Instead of importing nuclear technology at inflated prices, Sahel nations possess domestic nuclear capabilities that provide clean energy for industrial development. Regional integration has created a dynamic economic zone where goods, services, capital, and people flow freely across borders. The Alliance has leveraged its uranium wealth to attract investment in renewable energy, manufacturing, and technology sectors. Young people no longer feel compelled to risk dangerous journeys to Europe because economic opportunities exist at home. The success has inspired similar resource coordination agreements across Africa. The continent has emerged as a significant player in global governance, with African perspectives on climate change, sustainable development, and international security carrying real weight in global forums. The narrative has fundamentally shifted. Instead of Africa being portrayed as a continent of problems requiring external solutions, it's recognized as a continent of solutions that can benefit the entire world. This vision is not utopian fantasy. It's an achievable outcome if current trends continue and current leadership maintains its commitment to genuine sovereignty. The Uranium Alliance provides the economic foundation, but the transformation requires sustained effort across multiple dimensions: education, governance, infrastructure, and cultural renaissance. The success of the Sahel Alliance will depend not only on African efforts, but also on solidarity from progressive forces worldwide. Citizens in Western nations must understand that their government's opposition to African resource sovereignty ultimately serves narrow corporate interests rather than their own long-term welfare. A world where Africa controls its resources and uses them for continental development is a world with greater global stability, reduced migration pressures, and more sustainable development patterns. Europeans who genuinely care about addressing migration should support African economic sovereignty that creates opportunities at home rather than supporting extraction policies that drive people to seek opportunities abroad. Progressive activists, academics, and policymakers in Western nations have a crucial role to play in challenging the narrative frameworks that justify continued African subordination. They can expose the hypocrisies in Western policy, highlight the legitimate grievances driving African sovereignty movements, and build solidarity networks that support genuine African development. The Alliance of Sahel States represents more than a regional partnership. It embodies the crystallization of African aspirations that have been suppressed for centuries. Through their coordination on uranium resources, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are demonstrating that African nations can move beyond the role of passive suppliers in global value chains to become active shapers of global markets. Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his contemporaries across the Sahel have recognized a fundamental truth. Africa's time has come, and it will not be delayed by those who profit from the continent's continued subordination. They understand that genuine sovereignty requires economic sovereignty, and economic sovereignty requires collective action. The uranium strategy is just the beginning. If successful, it will provide the economic foundation for broader transformation, industrial development, technological advancement, educational excellence, and cultural renaissance. The Sahel could become the launching pad for Africa's emergence as a major pole in a multipolar world order. The youth of Africa are watching, learning, and preparing to take this transformation even further. They refuse to accept that their continent must remain a supplier of raw materials while importing manufactured goods. They demand the right to process their own resources, develop their own technologies, and chart their own development paths. This is not about rejecting international cooperation. It's about entering the global economy as equals rather than subordinates. It's about ensuring that Africa's vast resources serve African development first, creating prosperity that can then be shared with genuine partners rather than extracted by exploiters. The world stands at a crossroads. The old order of Western dominance and African subordination is crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions and the rising consciousness of African peoples. The question is not whether change will come, it's whether that change will happen through peaceful transformation or violent disruption. The Sahel Alliance offers a path toward peaceful transformation that benefits not just Africa, but the entire world. By supporting their uranium sovereignty strategy, we support a future where all nations can develop their resources for the benefit of their own peoples while contributing to global prosperity and stability. The time has come to choose sides in this struggle. Do we stand with the forces of genuine sovereignty, justice, and development? Or do we cling to systems of exploitation that have caused immense suffering while enriching a small global elite? For those who believe in justice, the choice is clear. The Sahel Alliance deserves our solidarity, our understanding, and our support as they work to transform not just their region, but the entire global order. If you believe Africa's time has come, if you support genuine sovereignty over neocolonial exploitation, then show your solidarity by engaging with this content. Like this video to help it reach more people who need to understand what's really happening in the Sahel. Subscribe to our channel to stay informed about Africa's ongoing transformation and the global implications of these historic changes. Share this video with friends, family, and social networks, because mainstream media won't tell these stories with the depth and perspective they deserve. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest analysis of Africa's rise and the worldwide shift toward multipolarity and justice. Every like, every share, every subscription is a vote for African sovereignty and against the forces that want to keep our continent subordinated. This is more than just YouTube engagement. This is solidarity with one of the most important movements of our time. Join us in supporting Africa's economic renaissance and the emergence of a more just global order. The future belongs to those who dare to claim it. The Sahel Alliance is showing the way. Now it's up to all of us to support them on this historic journey toward genuine